Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream this week. So we generally stream at 2 p.m. UTC on Wednesdays, rather. This week we're an hour later, which is great because it gave me an extra hour to kind of dive into some deep Python data model stuff, which we're going to run through first. It's going to be an interesting stream. Hopefully, I'll spend the first 10 minutes or so showing you what I've been building over the last few weeks, because there's really no need to have watched the previous episodes to understand this one, although we do accept that there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a reasonably advanced kind of Python tutorial that we're going through, sort of building an ODM from scratch. So let me share my screen. There we go. Oh, let's not start with the code. Let's start with just kind of going through the project. So this is the docbridge repo. This is the thing that I'm building. It's all on GitHub. The source is all available. You can play with it, write new tests, extend features, open pull requests, and in general, just kind of give me your feedback on it if you're interested. So as I say, I've been building this object document mapping library. So it's kind of a data access layer. It's meant to be reusable in applications and act as a kind of facade against your actual data model. So instead of the way that you model data in your database kind of pervading your application, the idea is that you have a data model within your application that stays as stable as it possibly can, and that abstracts out the way the data is being managed within the database. So some of these patterns, if you haven't really thought about data modeling in MongoDB before, it's definitely worth looking up this document. So building with patterns, it's on the MongoDB website. There is a link in the description below. So feel free to have a look at that. This, I think personally, is the most important document on the entire MongoDB website. It identifies a series of patterns that solve data modeling problems in MongoDB to optimize storage, data retrieval, data writing. And in general, it just gives you a kind of different way of thinking about how you store data in MongoDB. It's a very common mistake that beginners to MongoDB make, is that they just kind of dump JSON data in there and hope for the best. And that's not always optimal, you know. It's things can get out of hand. Let's talk about one of these patterns in a moment, and we'll talk about it against the library that I'm actually building. So here is an example in the documentation. It's some sample BSON data. So it's a dictionary. It has an identifier. So this is your unique identifier for this specific document, which is of type object ID. So you know immediately that this is BSON data and it's not JSON data, because JSON can't store object IDs. You'd have to convert it to a string or something. Same with the date time. You know, these are native BSON types. So this is a user profile. It's got a short bio. It's got a birth date. There's a script actually in the repository for generating test data, which is kind of useful. So the idea is that this is data that you might have behind something like a Twitter client. It's got a name, it's got a user ID, which is actually how I'm looking up the user. And then you can define a wrapper for it. So it's simple enough. You extend document, which is part of this library. If you've used an ODM before, this will be entirely familiar. So I've created a user profile, haven't actually added any fields to it, but because this is what I call a relaxed document. So I haven't specified any fields. I'm not restricting it to a specific schema. I haven't told the document how to do any translation. So by default, it just gives you access to all of the fields inside that data. So if I access _ID, I get that object ID I was just showing you. If I access the user ID, I get this number 4, but as a string, because that is how it's stored in here. And this is kind of something that you often see in data models, is that they've evolved over time. Maybe for whatever reason, this was originally a string, but nowadays it's just stored as a number. And, you know, ultimately, over time, you're probably going to want to migrate those models, those documents, to a new schema that stores this as a number. But meanwhile, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you said this has actually happened to Twitter, was they were reaching the limit user IDs. Was it tweet IDs? I think it was tweet IDs, as the largest number that they could represent in JSON. And so they actually had to add an extra field into their schema for the ID as a string. And then they asked people to change their code so that they used the string instead of the number, so that they could continue to grow. So yeah, perhaps this started out as a number and now it's a string. But the application expects it to be a number for whatever reason. So in this case, we can do a mapping. So this field, I can specify an ID. So I'm renaming the field now. It's no longer called underscore ID. And I use this field constructor, and I tell it that the actual underlying field is underscore ID. And now it knows how to look it up in the underlying document that the user profile wraps. And it doesn't do any deserialization. So it doesn't do any deserialization until you actually request data. So there's no copying of data from the BSON into this document. And I've done that on purpose, because if you're dealing with lots and lots of documents, that's kind of suboptimal. If you only want a few of the fields, there's no point in sort of copying and translating data that you're not actually using in a web page or in an application or something. So it's lazy in that way. User ID, I want the application to deal with it as an int, even though it's provided as a string. And so I can provide it this transform as well, which is just a function that takes the underlying type and returns the type that you want. An int just happens to be that kind of function. If you've worked with other ODMs, if you work with Django, a lot of this should seem kind of familiar. So this is some very simple mapping. I've got a fall through field that I think this is probably going to be functionality that I move back into this field class. And this just allows me to specify a list of names instead of just a single name. And then in the underlying document, when you request name, it'll look at full name. And if that's not there in the underlying BSON, it'll then try name. And if that's not there, then it'll throw an attribute error. So both name, it works with full name and name. So there's a nice example there. I've been updating the documentation, so I'm quite pleased with this documentation for showing off the different features. Then we come to really the first big feature that I wanted to implement, the thing that I'm maybe most proud of so far. So there's a pattern that you can see in here called the subset pattern. And I'll describe it to you rather than running through the documentation, but there's a breakdown on its own page in here. The idea is sometimes you'll have an array stored in your document, and that might be an array of all of the followers that your user profile has. And that's but the problem is you may have lots of followers. And this is a question we get a lot in webinars, is how do you deal with arrays that may get too big? And there's a couple of ways of dealing with it, but the primary thing to know is that you shouldn't have long arrays in your documents. We generally recommend no more than 200 items in an array, because documents start to get really inefficient when you're traversing the data in there. And so the subset pattern specifies that it points out that you usually only need the first few items in an array. So if you're looking through a profile's followers, you may not get past the first page. You may not scroll down and load in dynamically some more followers. So in fact, maybe most of the time, you just want to embed the top 20 followers, top 200 followers inside your profile document, and then store the rest somewhere else. So they can be looked up later. That's a more expensive operation, but you're not going to be doing it all the time. And this is something that you would have to hard code into your application generally, or you'd have to, if you were using an ODM, you would have to write some logic in there to request more objects on demand. I wanted to abstract it out behind a specific type of field. And so I've defined the sequence field. This can just work with embedded arrays. You can specify the type, and that just means when you iterate through this followers attribute, it will give you follower instances that are mapping to these subdocuments. But if you get to the end of the actual embedded array, it can do an extra query to get the rest of the items. So in this case, it's saying that there is a superset. So only the subset is in this document. The superset is stored in another collection called followers. And when you want to get them, you execute this query. So it's in this case, it's just a lambda to make it quicker to write, and it's passed this instance, so this profile instance, as a parameter, which means that then you can look up the user ID in the other collection, and unwind. So in this case, I bucketed the items, and then it just brings them up to the top level. So don't worry about this query too much. Just notice that this is essentially a join with another collection. You're just requesting some more documents. And so if I instantiate this profile with some user data, then I can loop through all of the followers, and it will get the first, in this case, 20, because I store 20 in the data set, and then afterward in the profiles collection, and then afterwards it will go and look them up in this followers collection over here. So this all works. This is where we've been over the last 6 hours of me coding and explaining how I'm building stuff. So let's talk a little bit about updates. So the last 2 episodes that we've had, I've been starting to prepare for actually saving data. I've done lots of stuff here for reading data when it doesn't quite match the schema that you've got behind the scenes, but I haven't got to the point of actually writing any data back to the database yet. And that's partly because it's quite complex, and partly just we haven't got to that stage. I wanted to deal with the read stuff first. One thing, another document on the MongoDB website that I would like to point you at, there's a video as well for people who don't like to read so much, is my colleague Paul is an amazingly experienced MongoDB developer. He's the author of a book called Practical Aggregation Pipelines, I think. You can look it up. And he wrote this, I guess, the year before last. And it talks about some basic principles for building applications or working with data in MongoDB, where you've got multiple applications accessing the same database and the same documents. And where you don't want these microservices, usually microservices, to be sort of overwriting each other and messing up each other's data. So you don't want each application to have a whole view of the data, and you want them to work with their subsets, but you also don't want them kind of overwriting each other. And one of these principles is I mean, there's a few of them. Support optional fields, because field absence conveys meaning, and that's something that I've been trying to implement in this ODM. But updates, he says, always use in-place operators, changing targeted fields only. So what this means is when I want to save a document back to the database, I don't want to just overwrite the existing document. I want to do a series of set operations, usually on specific fields, so that I only modify the fields that have changed that I know about. There are other operators when you do an update. There's an increment operator, there's as well as set, and we'll want to delete fields as well. But let's focus on set today. So let me show you where I am in the code. Here we go. Make that a little bit bigger because I know that we sometimes have some viewers on mobile phones. Yeah, do I want to close this? I'll just shrink this down. Actually, I'll need that terminal later. So yeah, I went into a bit of a deep dive when I was preparing for this live stream. So we're actually going to do some stuff on the data model that isn't directly related. Well, I suppose it is fixing a bug in my ODM, but let me first show you where I am. We have a reasonably comprehensive test suite in here. Let me close some tabs. Oops. Let's say don't save. And we can get rid of, well, no, I'll leave that up. So all of my code at the moment is in this one file. As you can see, this ODM currently is only 200 lines of code. It doesn't have great error handling. There's still some extra features that I want to add in, but I feel like I've got quite a lot done with just sort of building this relatively lightweight framework. And you can see some of the classes here that I've been referring to and talking about what it does. So with preparing, so at the moment we have the main magic here with getting attributes, with dynamic attributes, so ones that aren't specified as a field. Getatter is it's a dunder method. That means it changes the way that Python works or interacts with this class. This is actually a fallback method. So if you look up an attribute, let's say self._doc, normally it will just look it up inside the object, and then if it's not in your instance, it will look at the class, and then it will go up the class hierarchy to return a value. But if it can't find it, normally it would return an attribute error. If you implement this fallback method, you can intercept attribute requests where the attribute doesn't really exist on the instance or the class, and then you can get it to return something different. So I may have some print statements in here from some debugging I was doing earlier today. So the point here is actually that when I store things on the document, on this document subclass, so this document, then I don't want to store them actually on the instance. So I don't want to attach them to self. What I want to do is attach them to the underlying document. So that's what it does. If strict hasn't been set to true, then it just saves each attribute on the underlying document with the same name that you use to access it. And we've got test coverage for this. I think in fact, it'll be up here somewhere. But let's not worry about that too much. You're just going to have to trust me that this one is defined, but we've got some tests. I'm pretty certain we've got some tests for fields that aren't defined on here. So but then we've got some fields that are defined either through full through field or fields or sequence field. Those are accessed via what's called the descriptor protocol. The descriptor protocol says that when you attach an object, an attribute to a class, when you try to access that object, if it implements dunderget, it becomes a descriptor. So it's like magic. And instead of just returning the object, it will call this get method with the object that the field is attached to, the attribute is attached to, and the class that's sort of wrapping all of this. And so you can return anything you want. I could write a class where when you access the field hello_world, it returns you a string called hello_world, or whatever dynamically. So that's basically what this is dynamic attribute access, dynamic attribute lookup. The other this is all working. I have tests to prove that this is working. What we're working on now is the other side of the descriptor protocol, which is where we call set. And this here, I got this working last week. This is where when I try to assign to an attribute, it then calls set with this field, the document, and the value that's been provided, and then it just sets it on the underlying document. And there's some easy ways to mess this up where, well, certainly in set atta, there's some easy ways to make this recursive. So I have to check whether the document's strict, in which case it won't allow dynamic attributes, or if but otherwise, if it's sort of a special field, then it's not stored inside the document. We just assign it to the class. So when we set doc and when we set db, we want to assign those to self rather than assigning them to assigning them as an item inside the doc dictionary. And then finally, if it's strict and it hasn't been defined as a field, so it's not on class dict, then we throw an attribute error. So there's a bug in this code. Just going to check the comments. We got an empty comment box. If you're enjoying the live stream, just drop in your name and where you're watching from. It's always really nice to see where people are viewing the live stream from. So just let us know. And if you've got any questions as I go along, if I'm going too fast, just let me know that I'm going too fast, and I can explain things a bit more, kind of slow down. So this has a bug, and I didn't realize this when I wrote it last week, but I did when I tried to tidy things up today. Here I'm checking to see. So when I set a field, let's call it age. If it was a profile, you might have somebody's age. It would pass it as a string. So if I'm doing profile.age equals 24, this would be the string age, and this value would be the number 24. So I'm just checking to see whether age is inside the class dict. So I'm really seeing whether it's been defined as a field. And if it has been defined as a field, then essentially I want to do the normal thing, which is to follow the descriptor protocol and call set on that item. And you can do that. You can follow normal protocol by just calling the superclass's setatta method. So that will just do what you expect, or what Python expects anyway. The problem is if I have a hierarchy of classes, so if I have a user profile and I might have a special user profile or so that subclass is user profile, then I'm only checking the fields that are defined on this class. So the ones that are in my class dictionary. I'm not checking the inheritance hierarchy. It was a pretty amateur mistake, if I'm being honest. I'm a little bit embarrassed that I made this mistake. I have given some pretty advanced talks on the Python data model before, and I should know this. And it also meant there's also this here, which I don't like. It's like it's sort of special magic stuff, that needs to be defined on the class. And I thought, well, I can get around this by just defining these on the class. So they'll be overridden by self, because they're always set to something, even if that something is none. But I can just have them sort of shadowing doc equals none and db equals none. So then I thought, well, I can just, if I define those on there, then I can get rid of this, because now those two fields are defined on the class dict. So I think this works. Let's have a go. We should have really run the test first. Ooh. Oh, yeah. None-type object does not support item assignment. This is what I got when I tried this, even though I expected this to work. And this taught me something new about the Python data model that I didn't know before. So that everything's a learning exercise. So I thought I would pass it on to you, given that this was part of the exercise here, as well as talking about advanced MongoDB techniques, is to talk about some kind of intermediate to advanced Python techniques. So I thought we would just have a look at what's going on here. So let's just whittle it down to one of these tests to reduce noise. There we go. Cocktails is just a standard. It was just one of my first tests where I was trying to show what some user code might look like. I'm getting messages. Excuse me a moment. Nah, this is more important. Non-type object does not support item assignment, and that's because it's trying to set it on doc. And well, I thought that's what it was, but that isn't actually what it was. So what's happening is it's looking for the item in dict and then calling. Is it no? Oh yeah, let's go one level up in the code. So this is where it's setting underscore doc, and it's basically saying, well, underscore doc self doesn't have an underscore doc. So we can kind of print out what's going on here, I guess. Dict. So this just gives me everything that's defined on this class, and I would have expected underscore doc to be here. Oh yes, but it isn't, because it's actually defined on document, not on this class, which is a cocktail, I think. You won't find, oh, there it is. So we've got this cocktail class. So it's actually defined on document, which is the superclass. So I need to check not just whether it's in class, as I said, I need to check whether it's in the whole inheritance hierarchy. And you can do that. There's a method for doing that in Python. It's called hasAtta. And then you just say, you give it the thing you're looking for an attribute on, which is the self class, because I don't want to look at instance variables. Those are different. And then I want to give it the name of the thing. So this should be it. So if it has the attribute name on the class hierarchy, then it will do the normal setAtta thing. So that works, and in fact, most of the tests now, if I remember rightly, work, but there's two that don't. And this was really interesting to me. So one of the things was a test that I wrote last week, and it sets a value in capitals, but because, let's go and have a look at the test. This is test update field. It's near the bottom, I think. Test update documents. Oh, test update field. There we go. So And here's the profile. We defined the field on user ID, but when we try to set user ID, it's supposed to transform it to lowercase. So that's what it's actually supposed to save on the underlying document, on the BSON data. And it's not, right? It's coming back as capitals. And when I did some debugging, I realized that in fact, it's not falling into this branch. It's falling into this branch. So I can show you that by saying, oops, not print twice, f setting, whoops, its name to, and then they give it a value. So we should have some, let's just test this test, run this test. Ta-da! And it says setting user ID to test value 4. So it's not going through it's not detecting that there is a user ID defined on the class, but there is a user ID defined on the class. And I ended up looking at the documentation for hasatta, because this is obviously not doing what I expect. When I, again, did some debugging, this field is definitely defined on the class, but it's not finding it. And the reason is that this uses getAtta behind the scenes. And if getAtta, if it raises an attribute error, then it returns false because it doesn't have an attribute. So it actually tries to get the attribute and then just catches the exception. So what is actually going on here? It's looking up name on the class, and the name definitely exists. That's actually stored in self.class dict. So you'll see when I run this that there is a user ID. So yeah, it's like, but then yeah, it's not returning true. So the reason for this is that this field object is not doing the right thing. I made a pretty fundamental mistake in the way that field works. So it is calling getAtta actually. Oh no, sorry, get. That's why it's. How can I put this? It's calling get, but it's not passing the object. So I thought get was these dunder get methods were only called on the instance. So I knew they would be called when you call like profile with a lowercase user ID. But what I didn't realize was that if I call, basically a profile as in the class user ID, I expected this to be a field type. So I can check that with an isInstance. And this is going to return false. I hope. I sound very confident when I say that kind of thing. I should never demonstrate technology. So we've got an attribute error. Non-type has no attribute doc. Not quite sure why we're getting that now. And let's just comment out and see what happens. This, as I said, so we were getting this was the assertion error. Let's just see. Non-type has no attribute doc. Oh, that's exactly what it is. So this is the error that's being hidden. So what's happening is it's calling user IDs dunderget. It's calling fields dunderget method, but with this as none. And so then it's attempting to look it up here. So this is where the error is actually being raised from. And so the answer here is basically, if I'm trying to look it up on the class, or if I'm trying to look it up on the object, then do the magic, which is the whole reason we wrote this function. And otherwise, and I don't need this else statement, so I'll just remove it in a moment, just return self, because I need a way to get hold of this field to query it later on. So I basically this will fall through because there's a return in the previous line or a raise. This can just be return self. And now I should be able to get that field. So that assertion now passes this one. So user profile with the class user ID is now a field, and the instance user ID returns a string, and hopefully this will give me some passing tests. So I was quite relieved when I worked that out, because that was relatively close to the start of the stream. And I learned something new about the Python data model. It's worth noting, if you Google Python data model, it's trying to auto-complete me to Beanie, which is great ODM, actually, built on top of Pydantic for MongoDB. And that is kind of, that's production quality, whereas this library, definitely not at the moment. But this document in the Python language reference is, I know it's a big wall of text, but this shows you exactly how things are looked up on classes and instances and stuff like that. It is a really fun document if you read it, because you can start to see where all the escape hatches are to change the way that Python works, and I really like that. So yeah, honestly, I recommend checking this out. All of the magic in this ODM that I've written, descriptors, get-atta, set-atta, everything like that is defined in here. So this section, customizing attribute access, is basically describing both of those. It also describes the descriptor protocol in here somewhere, implementing descriptors. Since Python 3.7, you can implement get-atta on a module. So you can do modules that just dynamically return you attributes sort of on demand. You can even get sort of dynamic lists to sort of query the insides of a module that may change depending on, day of the week, or where the module's installed, or what your operating system is, whatever. There's some really fun stuff here. Here is the description of get. Is it this one that I wanted? Was it get-atta? I'm now losing my thread. Let's have a look at where we write this code. This was done to get. So, oops. So this is probably a little bit small, excuse me. So it says, call to get the attribute of the owner class of an instance of that class. The optional owner argument is the owner class, while instance is the instance that the attribute was accessed through, or it's none when the attribute is accessed through the owner, which is the class. So there we go. That describes exactly what I saw. I just didn't realize that it worked that way. And this is, how can I put this? This is showing you that something that Django does behind the scenes that I wasn't really aware of. Like, Django has already implemented this test, I'm guessing. I'm sure the code looks very similar to this. And so when you access these sort of defined fields on a data model, you'll get the field class if you access it through the parent class. Right, so now that we've got that fixed, let's just check in that code. I'm on main. Let me show you something else that I think is kind of cool. So I started to use LazyGit. I've got it installed as LazyGit, but I've also got it installed as LG because I use it all the time. It's a really nice textual interface to Git. And I've used a few Git UIs before and never really felt that they were speeding me up or helping me, except in sort of some unusual instances. LazyGit makes things really fast. So I can leave this open in a window and it will automatically refresh when files change. And you see it's showing me all the files that have changed here. There's a modified file here, modified tests, and an extra test file that I'm probably not going to commit. That was just like me confirming some understanding about what was going on. So I can just add these files to my next commit by hitting space on them. Oh, except I don't want to do that. I actually want to switch branches. So let me switch to, press tab to switch to the branches, tab, and everything, not everything. A lot of these commands are single keystrokes. It really speeds things up. So once you know, anything you do regularly, you'll know the keystroke for. If you don't know the keystroke, you can hit question mark and it will show you a contextual menu for the pane that you're in. The panel, that I'm in. I'm on the branches panel. So it's giving me lots of branch operations. Some of these are single Git commands, but some of them are really basically scripts that are run against your Git repo. They're really cool. There's some things in here that I just didn't really know. I didn't really know I needed. If you Google LazyGit, they've got a great video tutorial just showing you how this can speed up your workflow. So I want to create a new branch. I believe that's B. No, it's N. So I'm going to create a new branch. I could hit return, enter. now, but I'm just going to show you how quick that is. Hit N, new branch name, and I'm going to call this EP7 because it's the 7th episode, and that seems to be how I'm branching. And then I can hit C to do a commit, to commit the files that I've added in the previous pane. Did I that? Yes, I did. So I can hit commit summary. So fix attribute field lookup on via containing class. Now I can push that by hitting capital P, Shift P, and because I haven't got this remote set up, it automatically sets me up with an upstream called EP7, and I can hit enter, and that's now pushing to GitHub. So if you were to check GitHub on the branches now, you'd see those changes that I've just made, and I can hit lowercase p to pull anytime I want to as well from the remote repo. So it's got some really nice features. Hit Q to quit, and yeah, I recommend you check that out if you're not already using it. I love that tool. It's the first tool that I've really raved about for a while. And I really feel it sort of changed my development workflow. There is one more change I'm going to make here because I'm getting these yellow lines on document and field. I feel like today's actually going to be a bit of a cleanup thing. So we've cleaned up that bug, and these are getting yellow lines from rough because I'm doing star import. I thought in the tests it would be fine to do a star import, and then I installed rough, and now I'm getting lots of errors because it's integrated with VS Code. So it's only a few classes, so I might as well field, fall through field, and sequence field. I'd like to point out that wasn't really bad practice, that doing the asterisk import in this case, because at the top of init I am defining all. So these are the sort of default exports that I wanted. So I knew that those were the things that would be imported. Okay, I can fire up LG again. Oh no, not enough space. It will work in relatively small space, but because they've got such large text, for your benefit, it's causing me some yeah, it just won't render in the space that I've got. So yeah, right. Okay, so now I've got that fixed, I'm going to look back at my set implementation, and I'm going to start talking about what I want to implement. So an update to the database is really a set of commands against an object. So what I want is a save method on document that has some default behavior. We'll put some hooks in so you can intercept the behavior, because the whole point of this is really that these documents don't map to documents in your database. They map to documents that are coming back from a query. So those are two subtly different things, especially if you're doing aggregation pipelines. The documents you get back may not reflect individual documents in your database at all. You know, it's data that's combined across time series data or grouped together from different documents and things like that. So I want a save method in here. Always forget to put self in. Sometimes forget to put the colon at the end of the line. I've been programming in Python for 23 years. You would think I'd know better by now. Now I have made it so that the db_db is available here. When one of these objects is instantiated, the db is provided. I'm going to say I don't love that being in the constructor, but I'm going to leave that to sort of cleaning up the API later on. But for the moment, like, how can I put it? Like a really simple sort of update would be something like db. Oh, in fact, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't actually have the collection. I've got the database, but not the collection. In fact, that'd be self._db collection. Okay, so I may actually have to provide the collection or the collection name here somewhere, or it could be, for the moment, let's provide it in here, and then I can put match criteria, which is basically a find statement, and then I'm going to do an update. So this may update lots of documents, which may or may not be what we want. I haven't really decided yet, but let's put match criteria in here. And then a naive way to do it would be kind of like calling set and then just passing it the document, which I think would work. So self.doc. But the problem is that then that's just gonna it's going to overwrite any data that we didn't get. So if this document was instantiated from had a projection stage in the to get the BSON, you're going to be missing some fields here. And so when I write all of this back, oh no, actually set would do this. Set would work. But I really don't want to do this. What I want to do is every time one of these field values is changed, I want to record that there's a new value for that field. So yeah, I'm going to have to think about that, how this works recursively as well, because that's another thing that I haven't really thought about. But let's start by storing away modified fields. I think that's a good place to start. I haven't quite got this figured out in my head yet. But every time setAtter is called, if I was to have also a special field, so let's modified fields. I'm going to have to find a different way of storing data on here because I don't like this. But often you can't really tell until it's done. Self-modified fields, and then we've got, so this is going to work for top level attributes initially. Every time you change a value, so that's getAtter, sorry. Every time a new value is set here, so these are dynamic attributes, I'm gonna fields update. What does that take? Yeah, this supports keys and get item. So actually this is a key, which is name and value. Oh, do I want value? Oh, I wonder if this should just be a set of names and then I can go get the values at the end. For the moment, let's just leave it like this. It's storing a copy of the data, the change data, and I'm not sure I like that. But let's just see how this feels. Let's go and have a look at the field definition. I'm only worrying about field at the moment, not fall through field. And here is init get set. Oh, have I not? There it is, set. It's just very short. Okay, and it's I have the name of this. It's self.fieldName, and I have a new value. So that has to be passed through transform first. So transformed value is that. You know, there's probably a nice shortcut in VS Code for that. That's a relatively standard refactoring. And then this should be also transformed value. So that just kind of puts the new value in. At some point, I'm going to have counter fields that can just be incremented or queried, but I haven't quite got that. I think that's going to require a kind of proxy object that I don't want to define at the moment. I feel that's adding some extra complexity. So there's this sort of deep dive into sort of the way that Python works. It's kind of fun. So, okay, now I should have a set of modified fields. So when I call save, oh, it's not self dot. I nearly stored that on the field. I've lost it. Yeah, so it shouldn't be stored on self. It should be stored on ob modified field. So that's the document rather than the field. And okay, so now when I call save, let's for the moment just let's get it to return the modified field so we can just sort of have a look. Why is this false? Oh yeah, that should be is. So I can get rid of some more warnings in my test code. I do think test code should be as correct as possible, because apart from anything else, this is kind of a proxy for real client code, and so that should be written to a good standard. just run PyTest. Whoa, I got a failure. Type error. Why did I get that? Test update field expected at most one argument, got 2. I don't like this. Oh, this is just my new code. So update, I think, I haven't used update for a while. I don't need to use update. Why don't I could just use dictionary access. That makes a lot more sense. Excuse me. It's been a long day. Right, so self-modified fields, delete. I just want to override if it was in here before, I just want to override it with a new value. And I think I need to do the same in set. Field set. Let's try that. And this is self.field name. Descriptors are really cool. You can do some really clever stuff with them. If you want classes that record changes to them, I mean, that you can do that with get set atta, but it's like, there's a bunch of things you can do with descriptors, and they're nicely composable. So I'm a big fan once I learned how they worked. So let's go back to save in the document class. And then, well, here I've got my sort of sketch of what the code might look like. Let's just check that actually I'm passing my tests now, because I should be passing my tests. Yes. I probably want some tests to check that when I change a value, it's stored in the match criteria. That's a pretty good idea. One of the things I'm really pleased with this library is that I've been doing, not in this case, but I've been doing a lot of test first development. And so it just means I've got that test coverage, and I can kind of tell when I've broken things, which was a surprise to me when I was writing some new tests today. So here, test update strict, and we've got test update field here. Yep, that's the test that we were looking at before. And here I should assert that profile.modified fields user ID equals test value 4. So bear in mind that although this looks very similar, like doc contains all of the data and modified fields only contains the key value pairs that were modified. It's not storing the right value. That's interesting. Why? Because it's not transformed. Because it's not transformed, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to transform the value on the way into the database. So that's set in field. I'm purposely, I've got this code really big, and I'm sorry about all this scrolling. Let me use the outline panel to just kind of jump to some of these things. We've got set name. I should probably close most of these. Set. So this is transformed value. This should be transformed value too. Let's try that. Ta-da! Okay, and one more test because that was for a dynamic value. Oh no, this was for a set value. This isn't using set atta. This is using the descriptor. So I just need one more test for non-existent, and this should be here. It's non-existent, it's new value. Yeah, I think so. Yep. And finally, probably just assert len profile dot modified fields equals 1, because I've only made one change, and the same here. So why have I got 2? Because I've set because it's on the same profile. I'm sorry, I thought this was a strict. Okay, so this can be 2 because I've now set I've set user ID and non-existent. Cool. That's what happens when you haven't got tests that are just like separated out. And then finally, there's a strict profile. So I just need to check that strict profiles work the same way. So I think this was more or less a copy and paste anyway. Not there. This one. This is strict profile. And now just check the user ID contains test value 4. Nice. So I've got my list of modified fields. This is probably not just going to be a dict, a flat dict. In future, I actually plan to record a series of operations. So there'll be set operations and delete operations and increment operations. And then when you call update, it will either compose them at that point correctly, or it'll take the existing structure and just apply that to the documents that you ask it to. So that's, again, like this save doesn't automatically know which documents to look up. Although there is one thing I would like to do, which is that basically in save, I forgot about this. I was thinking about this earlier. In save, if match criteria can be none. And the reason for that is that basically if this underlying document contains an underscore ID, it will use that. So if match criteria is none, then match criteria equals ID, and then and this is just basically a convenience thing, right? Because I think most of the time these documents are going to map to a document in database, and so just writing back this data is going to be okay. I'm just returning self.modified fields so I can have a look at it now, so I can get a feel for it. I'm going to have to finish in a couple of minutes, just to let you know. So if you've got any feedback or any questions, just let me know. Happy to spend that last couple of minutes just kind of answering any quick questions you might have or responding to any comments. So self._modified fields, and then we got test save. So this is, I've got some test fixtures that provide me with an active MongoDB session, so I can actually run these integration tests against MongoDB, and I can automatically roll back a transaction if I want to. So this sounds like a good thing for a save function, is to be able to roll back those changes after I've run my tests. So that's kind of handy. That even means if they fail in the middle, that rollback will be done. So that's good. Right. So let's create a profile by loading some data from the database. And here we go. I may one day add some convenience methods for looking up these objects. I'm not against documents mapping directly to documents in the database. I don't want that to be the default. I want this to be an abstraction. It should be easy for the easy use cases, and also like pave the cow paths for. So what I mean is, like, for the design patterns we've identified that we want people to use, those should be part of the API here. So things like the subset pattern that I was talking about earlier. So here I've instantiated my profile. Where is DB coming from? Oh, okay. There we go. I actually had to look up the database. Oh, I'm scrolling too fast. I apologize. I know that's annoying when you're watching somebody else code, is having them sort of skip through the code. It's difficult to sort of keep context. Right, and we've got profile, which I also don't have in here, but I can steal from here. So bear in mind, these profiles actually contain lots of fields. I've created lots of fake data, but these profile classes only really know about user ID at the moment. Okay, and then I'm not accessing profile at the moment, but I will. So it's looking up user ID 4, which is a sort of fixture in my database, like data fixture. So let's go and have a look at that. Oh, give it a couple of minutes. Wrong tab. This tab. So here is that's a follower. Profiles. It's a bit more in depth. So we got user ID and we've got user ID 4. So I just want to check that a value is what it should be. So username should be Tanya 15. Let's run this test. Profile object has no attribute. Yes, because it's strict. I've copied it from the strict test. So it doesn't allow dynamic attributes. So anything that isn't defined as a field is just ignored. And there we go. So got my dynamic field. I should also be able to check that user ID, this is a descriptor for, right. Okay, and then I'm going to check next week. In fact, I'll just print here and then do a fail profile dot modified fields and then fail. So now we should just see that output. Fail saved, and then this is the modified. No, those are, the modified fields 0 because I haven't changed anything. So I changed username. I've got 2 minutes left. So there we go. Username is new value. Cool. That gives me a starting point for next week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. We do this live, usually at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. So do join me next week. Otherwise, you can watch the recordings. They're all on the MongoDB YouTube channel where you're watching this. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again in the future. And yeah, I'm really enjoying this project. So please follow along and leave comments either in the GitHub repo or on the YouTube stream. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.